Well, now, you talking about long awaited now. I understand that our program today is by special request.
It is. You've heard of command performances. Well, this was just a friend that said to me, um, when did you do the program on the lost cemetery that you discovered over in the corner of the county? And I said, we haven't done it. He said, well, I knew I'd missed it and I wanted to hear it. And said, sometime when you do it, tell about discovering this cemetery. And, of course, this goes back to the Regulator-Moderator War. I didn't know we hadn't talked about it in here. I'm so full of it I could talk the rest of this year on that, because I guess I have the biggest collection of fact and legend on that war of anybody around, because I have prepared to write a book on it. And so I thought, well, we'll just do that. I have all the material. I could just bring a bushel of it out any time. And I might tell how we discovered this cemetery, and I published the story of that in the East Texas genealogical family record, and I called it a historical discovery on the border. And here's the way it happened. Two young surveyors, this must have been about 1983, the best I can figure it, were going along resurveying the pipeline way down past Old Center. There's a pipeline through there, but they were going to add another one or something. I don't know exactly how to do it. But they were in there surveying, and they suddenly came out because there is a law. They found something that they had to ask about. There is a law, and I don't know how many people understand that law, that protects whatever's in the ground of our ancestors. Nobody can dig a foundation or a pipeline or anything else through a cemetery or anything that unearths some archival history without talking first with whoever is the historical leader in the area. And these two young men came to the courthouse. Now, this was back when Rough Wall was judge, and I was county chairman at that time still. I mean, that early, of the Historical Commission. And they told Rough Wall that they had discovered a cemetery back there, and they'd had a sign on it saying Regulator Graveyard. And, of course, Rough Wall had not heard of it. The court had not heard of it, and they said if anybody knows about it, it'd be Miss LeGrone. So they called me, and I had not heard of it either. And I said, well, I have to know about it. And these young men were so nice. I talked to them on the telephone, and they said they would come to my house and tell me about it. And I had the big map that we now have in the library of all the land grants of the county, and it shows just what was where in the beginning. I spread that out. It was not framed at that time. I spread it out on the living room floor, and in 1983 I was a little more agile than I am now, and we crawled around on the floor. I was with them, and they showed me exactly where it was on the map. And it's just a few miles down in the corner, southeast corner of the county, just a few miles from Shelby County, and just a few miles, I guess about a mile and a half maybe, from the river. Okay. I said, how do I get to it? They said, you'd never find it without somebody telling you how. And so they promised that they would go back and measure the distance from turn to turn and tell me how to get there. So they went back in the truck and then called me and says, you go to Old Center and you turn left at Old Center on road so-and-so, and you go so far and you turn on the next road so-and-so, and told me exactly a mile and 7/10 here, and they measured the mileage all the way. And finally you get to a bunch of shacks, and they're on a pipeline, where a pipeline is. And there are no more roads. That's the end of the road. The county had numbered the roads just before that, the county roads. There are not any more roads. You just turn up that pipeline. And back then they did drive trucks in to see about the wells and what have you. So that's all the kind of road there was, and there were no bridges over streams or anything else. They warned me about that, but it was dry weather right at that time. And I said, okay, I have to see it. Tell me what I'm going to look for. And they told me exactly what kind of situation it'd be, and off to the right of the road, park, and off to the right. And when I got there, I'd have see such and such. Okay, my granddaughter teaches at junior high school, Kathy Nix. And I called them to tell her to call me at her off period, and she did. And I said, come by and go with me on an errand this afternoon. And I told her what it was, and she said, be there after school, as soon as school's out. So I was ready to go, and we drove in there ourselves, just the two of us. And it is the backside of nowhere. But she's a good
adventure.
driver.
Here we
It's
go.
adventure. I've been on them many a time, and used to would go by myself, but I won't anymore because I might get car trouble way back there somewhere. Anyway, we drove right to it, just like they said. And I was just mystified because, of course, all the graves are gone now. But the little sign said there is a little granite shaft that is ages old. It's back in the 1840s, so that's a while ago. And that's the only permanent thing that's there, except there are crepe myrtles where people have planted things around the graves, and they're still in the woods blooming there. And there was this sign, and it was modern. The sign was modern. So somebody knew, see. And this mystified me even more. The pipeline wasn't going to bother it. It was off to the side, but I needed to know more about that graveyard if I was going to be a historian. And, of course, it piqued my interest anyway, and I began to try to investigate. And that sign was like funeral homes put on new graves. So it was not old. And on it said, Regulator Graveyard, 10 here, 10 graves. 1840 to 1850 something, I forgot. And then there were always shrubs planted around, but of course and one place was marked with a large white rock, and the rest of it was just forest. That was in the forest. So I began my investigation to see. Of course, Regulator was the name I had been studying in the Regulator Moderator War, and I'd made up my mind that the stories you hear were just partly true, and I wanted to know facts, and so I was just studying everything I could find and had been doing it for years and collecting material on it, and I said someday I'm going to set the record as straight as it can be set, because there are two sides to this thing. And so then I began to study how this began and what this could be. And to make a long story short, and someday we'll reveal the whole story, but to make a long story short, nobody in the state knew anything about it. I conversed with the Historical Commission in Austin. Nobody in the county. I began to publish notes on it, and I published this long article in the Tyler paper from the Genealogical Society, and I told how to get to it and invited a lot of other people to get to it. And finally, one night when we were having a Historical Commission meeting, Cliff Townsend had taken the instructions I had given, and he and his family had gone adventuring to the place. And in the meantime, something had caused the little glass cover that's on those little marker, the little thing they stick down, the little marker. The glass was broken, and the note inside with the lettering on it was fluttering in the wind, and he pulled it out and turned it over and looked on the back side, and it had a name and a telephone number. And so he gave me that. Gosh, I knew the name. The man was at Center. He had married my husband's cousin. I knew he was a historian at Center. And so that night, had his telephone number on, that night I called him and had a long conversation with him. He said, yes, he put it there. He was trying to keep the place from being lost, and he knew about it, and it was the burial place a Watt Mormon, the meanest man that ever lived in East Texas. He was the leader of the Regulators. And his home and family was just on the hill by this. This was really a family cemetery, but he was the leader of the Regulators, so some of the Regulators were buried there. I knew there'd been a battle back in there. And so then I began to track down Watt Mormon. And I have a biography of him that I could write easily, and am going to write one day. And this was, of course, historical find. They had known about it from legends in the center area. Old-timers had passed the story down. So I've gone back to it time and again, and he explained to me why there's just one rock there. He said all of the graves once were marked with those special rocks that have been brought in. As you noticed, there are no other rocks there like that one. It's just the one. And he says it is cemented to the shaft that's there, the original marker. And he says, I did it to keep that one from being carried off, because people have carried all the others off as souvenirs. And so he had anchored that one there at the spot so it couldn't be moved. And so he had done his bit to mark the place. But, of course, there was more to the story, and I wanted to keep searching, in which I have done. But to backtrack about who this man was and what this is so rich in history. This is one of the things that's kept me digging. All along the border of this county and this state, from from up past Marshall at the Jefferson area, there were feuds. And one big feud was the Regulator-Moderator War, the biggest feud that's ever been in Texas. And at least 50, I can track down, were killed on the two sides. And it was such a fierce warfare for 4 years. Now, this was in Texas Republic days. And I have and I just have bushels of information. And I keep saying, I'm going to write it, I'm going to write it. Well, I think these boys have just about decided that I'm going to play out before I write it. So they have even, some of them have given me a dictaphone to get me at it. And I don't have time to talk on the dictaphone either, because I'm going here and yonder. And I keep saying, when we get the jail building on safe ground so everybody can take care of it, I'll back in a corner with my typewriter and write this. So I wrote down some notes here, and I haven't even covered what I wrote down. But I'm saying, so here you are, Bob, and Dow, and Tommy, and John, and any of the rest of you that have been needling me to get with this. Now, here's a little slice of the story. But, oh, it is so rich, and every pioneer family that lived along the edge of East Texas there was involved. And the main reason that I've had so much trouble getting the information is that people don't want to admit that their ancestors were in it. And the story hadn't been carried down in the families very well. I have been to the archives in Austin, and I have a copy of the most priceless collection that has been made. It was never published, and they made a copy for me because I was just having a fit. I didn't have time to stay to digest it all. And so this is Ashcroft, Dr. Levi Ashcroft. And he died about 10 years later than that, so this is pretty fresh stuff. Then I have been, the word gets around, and I have been in correspondence in the last year with a judge that has sent me some material that I had not seen. And so I have just a pile of stuff. And I have this little, you see, one tells it from the moderator side, another tells it from the regulator side, and you've got to put them together because a lot of it is just legend. And sifting fact from legend is not easy. There is in this county a little stream called Battle Branch in what is now Panola County. Of course, they keep saying this was fought in Shelby County, but we were Shelby County then, see? We didn't have a Panola County. And we had companies coming from Marshall and killings at Marshall on Caddo Lake. One of the most famous of the killings was Robert Potter's murder on Caddo Lake. And to come on down to us and make it part of us for sure. The Duncans, you know the Duncans that settled out here a few years ago on Dixie Lake? All right. They were in Thailand, and she happened to read the book about all that gives the best story of this of any other book, and that's Love is a Wild Assault by Leif Hamilton. All right. Miss Duncan was so enthralled with that book, and so am I. It is the most thrilling thing you've ever seen, and it is on Texas history, East Texas largely. And she read that book, and she says, I want the place where this happened, and that was Potter's Point on Caddo Lake. So while they were in Thailand, they bought a retirement spot at Potter's Point. And when they came back to the States, they went directly there to make their retirement home. And it's a most remote, secluded place. Old folks don't need to be out that far from everything. So they decided against making it a permanent home, came on here and built their house on Dixie Lake out here. And of course have recently sold that. Of course, as you know, isn't Debbie moving into that house? Sure. All right, you see? It's connected. It thrilled her so that's the reason they came here in the first place. They came to Potter's Point on Caddo Lake. All right. It was so remote they knew they couldn't spend their last years there. So they came on. I don't know who told them about. They wanted to be on a lake apparently, and they built this house then on Dixie Lake. And now they're in a retirement home in Shreveport and have sold the place. But nothing is just a little cocoon on its own. Nothing that's happened. This has influenced our lives, and the history books have lost it. In my childhood, there was a story in the history books about the Regulator-Moderator War. It's not there anymore. Because there's so much modern history they're having to put into the books, they can't tell the pioneer stuff. But the pioneer stuff is what puts our feet on the ground. That's what tells us how we got here. So I said to Mr. Chapman, when he was speaking last week, somebody in Washington needs to speak for our heritage. We need to be alert to the fact that this didn't just happen accidentally. Everything here was the result of dangerous living, really dangerous living. So I promise you guys, if you're listening, that this is going to be written. I'm going to stay around till I get it done.
Oh, well, very good. That's what we need to find out is little unusual stories that no one knows about.
Oh, this is so rich, and it was 4 years of warfare, just up and down the woods, trails in the woods, and pitched battles. And I have found, I think, around 500 names of people involved in it.
And probably very interesting stories about all 500.
Oh, yes. We won't ever find all the stories because a lot of them are lost. But I've tramped up and down this area all the way from Jefferson to Marshall to all the way to Austin to St. Augustine. I handled some of the original Redlanders that were published at the time. They're just falling apart, but they laid them in my hand and let me look at them. From St. Augustine right during the warfare. Boy, I could hardly hold them. I trembled so. This is so rich, so rich. And it was our ancestors, and whether they wanted to be in it or not, they had to protect themselves.
Good. Well, I can see that this will be several interesting programs coming up from this.
I could take a story and tell it, and then another story.